Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we're reading Hellblazer number 96. And just a little catch up on what's been going on. The demon boar has possessed the son of one of John's childhood friends in order to force John into an ultimatum where John will give up his soul in exchange for the boys, and then the demon boar will use John's soul to reestablish the reign of the first of the fallen in hell. But of course, John isn't going to lay down and take that. So in the last issue, we saw him divide himself into two. We'll say one part was the bad stuff and one part was the good stuff. And at the end of the last issue, in the confrontation where John showed up with the child and called Boar forth, John was told to kill himself with a knife, and he couldn't do it. He just curled up in a fetal position and cried on the ground. And right at that moment, another John Constantine showed up, and that's where we left off, with the second John showing up, and seemingly this is all going according to plan. So first things first, with issue 96, we got the cover. We see there are two Johns. One of them is on the ground inside of a pentagram, and he looks like he's struggling or crying on the ground. And standing next to him is another John, and that John has one foot on the John that's on the ground. And the one that's standing is looking out at us, and he's got a very cocky smile. But his eyes do look a little off. They are completely black, and all you can see is a little sheen of white where his pupils would be. And also we see on this cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Sean Phillips. And as we turn to the first page, we see a bunch of panels that are showing different parts of John's life. In the first panel, we see two fetuses, and they're hovering in the womb, and one looks kind of deformed, and that's, of course, our John. And then the other one has like a golden sheen around it, so that's the golden child. If you didn't know, John had a twin, and at one time he had killed this golden boy, but at the end of the Jamie Delano run, he was able to make himself whole and absorb the golden child version of him, which made him a more complete person. Then we see him as a baby, and he's, looking pretty terrible, throwing food at his dad. Then we see him as a punk rocker in his teenage years. Then we see him walking around with a beard and a liquor bottle, so this must be after Kit broke up with him and he was kind of homeless for a while. And over these panels, there's a narration that says, "It's not the length of the fall that kills you. It's the hard, dirty bit at the end. If only someone would explain that, maybe you'd chuck it all in before taking the plunge. But you don't have that choice. Your first little baby thought is a suspicion that you're already doomed. Powerless, you scream to the heavens in defiance. Nobody listens to your cries. You fall faster. There's no safety net now. You're flying solo. Live for today, you think. Tomorrow never comes. But tomorrow always comes, just like you knew it would. Now you can only find comfort in oblivion. You tumble through a cloud of self-pity and despair, regretting every decision you ever made." Then we get some more panels from his life, and we see him trying to rescue Astra, but she's being pulled into a pit full of teeth that is supposed to represent hell. Then we see John playing the didgeridoo with the Aborigines from the beginning of this Paul Jenkins run. Then we see a very old John with an old woman, and I think this is supposed to just represent John's older future, and we can see he's in a nursing home. And the narration continues. "Your life speeds too quickly to see, merging into a blur of doubts and disappointment. You catch a glimpse of past mistakes and the occasional truth. Then suddenly, you're near the end of the fall. You know what you did wrong now. If only you could go back. If only you had more time, you think, as the ground rushes up to meet you." Then we cut to the present, where John is smoking a cigarette standing in front of Boar, and he's looking down on his other self, which is still curled in the fetal position. And the narration continues saying, "Having said that, there is one way to make this whole pointless ordeal actually mean something, and that's to find the courage to wake up one day, rub the dust out of your eyes, and take a good hard look at yourself." We also see on this page that the name of this issue is Critical Mass Part 5, Hook, Line, and Sinker. And as John is looking down at his other self on the ground, we do see that Boar looks very shocked and kind of scared. And as we turn the page, we see Boar yell out, "What have you done, Constantine? Even you would not dare attempt such coarse trickery!" And at that, John just takes a puff of his cigarette and kind of side-eyes Boar and says, "Oh, just put a bloody sock in it, will you? Honestly." And then he looks over at Astra's spirit, and he kneels down in front of it to get like eye level with Astra, and he says, "Hello, Astra, darling. Sorry it took me so long." And Astra kind of smiles at him and says, "I knew you'd come and get me. He's afraid, John. He's scared of you, I can tell." And John replies, "Don't worry, love. I know." Then Boar interrupts them and says, "Enough, Constantine, if that is who you really are. This insane pretense serves only to anger me further." And then John looks up at him, and he flicks his cigarette through Boar's smoky apparition, and he says, "Well, you know what they say, mate. Life is like a pubic hair in a toilet seat. Sooner or later, you get pissed off." Then the John on the ground, who I'm going to call Loser John from now on, looks up at Confident John and says, What's going on? Christ, who the fuck are you?" And Confident John looks down at him and says, "Well, I would have thought that's bleeding obvious, John. I'm you. I'm you, you're me, and this nasty little turd's in a spot of bother." And then he points at Boar as he says that, and he continues saying, "Don't worry, you'll catch on in a bit. In the meantime, let's have some fun with this knob-end, shall we?" And then John begins to talk to Boar and says, "I've got to hand it to you, Boar. You really had me, you know that? You found my darkest, ugliest parcel of guilt and started to unwrap it right in front of my eyes. I sat there watching the boy suffer, knowing it was my fault, certain there was nothing I could do about it, and my life began to unravel along with my soul. Thing is, I knew you were pulling my strings. Christ, I knew everything you were going to do, but I was powerless to stop it. Every night you'd toy with my remorse, remind me of my weakness, and strip another piece of my spirit away. I didn't know where to turn, wasn't even sure if I should get involved, for fear of making it worse. So I went to Abaton and found out the truth, that no matter what devious little maneuver I pulled, my soul was going to hell. And suddenly, nothing really mattered anymore. Not bad, Sunshine. Not bad at all. For a beginner." And at hearing all this, Boar looks kind of scared and definitely unsure of everything that he's done so far. So John continues explaining to him, "Problem is, you had to keep pushing, didn't you? Just to remind me what I'd done to Astra, and what I'd be doing to Snyder if I didn't play along. There I was, all set to cash in me chips, when a funny thing happened. This old mate of mine showed up out of the blue. I was so busy wallowing in self-pity, I almost didn't listen. And the friend John is talking about is the Phantom Stranger from the 3rd issue in this arc, who visited John in his dreams and told John to remember his demon blood." And John continues, "Me and him have had our ups and downs, you know, so I was hardly likely to trust him considering the state I was in. 'Remember the demon blood,' he said, and I realized I'd been lugging a piece of hell around for so long, I'd become used to the pain. All of a sudden, I had this unbelievably insane idea. I was going to take all the pieces of me that you were exploiting and shove them where the sun don't shine." And then Confident John kneels down in front of Loser John, and he pulls him up from under his chin, and he kind of looks at him with disgust and continues saying, "After all, there's two sides to everyone, isn't there? I just worked out how to divvy up the naughty bits." And at this, Boar looks even more scared, and he says, "Hey, Walken, you've purged yourself of your soul. I refuse to believe it. I know you, Constantine. You are not that proficient in the arts." And John replies, "Maybe so, mate, but I've got you by the short and curlies, haven't I? Normally, I'd keep my distance from all that master of the mystic arts crap, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and I knew it'd be the last thing you'd expect, so I went ahead and did it. It's the ultimate catharsis, isn't it? I washed out all the smeggy bits of my soul and chucked them into a temporary version of myself. Now I was finally doing some manipulation of my own." And now all of this is starting to make sense, because in the last issue, John, if you remember, his skin was like coming off and stuff, and that's because that was the Loser John, and he had all that demon blood. And if you remember at the beginning, when John first got his demon blood, his skin was looking really bad. It was kind of eating away at him, and he had to figure out a way for that to stop. But when he put it all in the separate Loser John body, all that began again. So now that John has revealed his cards, he pulls something out of his trench coat. It looks like a bunch of papers, and he says, "Oh yeah, I almost forgot. the hows and whys. And then he throws this bunch of papers at Boer, and as Boer catches it, we see the top page, and it reads, On the Transfer and Application of Souls by Aleister Crowley. And then John mockingly says, Well, I don't just read the Beano now, do I? So anyway, the hard part. Getting young John here to remember our master plan. Thank Christ for British Telecom, eh? And underneath this narration, we're seeing the scene from part 3 of this arc where John got a phone call after he woke up confused in a hotel room. So I guess that was the confident John calling the loser John. And confident John continues saying, I mean, you hear your own voice over the speaker, and it never sounds like you, does it? And he says this as he looks down at loser John, who's still on the ground. And loser John looks up at him and says, Oh, Jesus, it was you. And confident John replies, Yeah, sorry about that, son. I know it's not easy keeping a clear head when you're just a lump of a turd. I had to give you a little push. Make sure you went up to Haggisland to see Crowley. Poor old Allie. He's a total bastard, you know. Faked his death 50-odd years ago, trying to avoid the unavoidable. He's been out by the lock ever since, frightened out of his tiny mind. My guess was he'd give up his soul to get out of the circles. And when he took the bait, I was right there to make sure it all went smoothly, and do a bit of fiddling. And under this narration, we're seeing the panels where loser John went to go see Aleister Crowley at the lake's edge, and we can now see the confident John's point of view, where he is standing and watching them and making sure everything goes down like it was supposed to. And we didn't see this part of it, but John continues explaining what happened after Aleister burned up, and he says, Time slows down in that instant of transfer. You can clearly see all the pieces that make up the sum total of yourself. I just divided them all up, took the bits I wanted, and put the rest inside of Crowley. Never taken a crap like it, to be honest. It was almost spiritual. So now there's 2 of me, and one of us is going to hell. And then John pauses to light another cigarette, and Boer pleads to him, saying, You cannot do this, Constantine! The rules of engagement! But John cuts him off, saying, Bollocks to the rules. Fact is, I've had a right laugh listening to you lay it all out for me. You need my soul to bring back your boss, and I've decided to give you this instead. And as he says this, he points to loser John on the ground. Then we turn the page and we cut to Greece. And we see the First of the Fallen is still waiting on that outcrop of rocks in the ocean, but now the police have finally figured out where he is, and they are arriving in full force. They have body armor and face shields and assault rifles, and as they rush at him sitting on the rocks, the narration says, Theo knows that the time is upon him. Nothing else is of consequence. Any second now, he thinks, as he patiently waits on his favorite rock. So the First of the Fallen is facing towards the ocean away from the shoreline where the police are coming from, and he's not even acknowledging them. And as they approach from behind him, he says out loud, Any second. Then we come back to loser John pleading with confident John, and he's saying, No, you can't. Can't just fuck about with soul transference like that. We're the same person. We have to get back. And confident John looks down at him and says, Don't even say it, John. I'm not going back to what I was. Look, I know how you feel, believe me. But think about it. This was your idea as well. Let's face it, one of us is going, and it bloody well isn't me. Then Boer interjects, and he has a little smile on his face like maybe he's figured something out, and he says, Wait, Constantine, I have reconsidered. And confident John looks at him and says, Yeah, I'm sure you have, pal. And then he points back to loser John and he says, Can you imagine what that big girl's blouse will do when this shithead shows up on his doorstep? He'll be mildly peeved, is my bet. And then loser John stands up and he yells at confident John saying, You stupid tosser! Why should it be me? I know what hell is, John. The evil bastard will destroy me. And confident John gives a smile and says, Come on, old son. I've got it all sorted. Trust me. So I forced all the crappy bits on you. All the addictions and the guilt and the angst. So what? You've still got all you need to get by down there. You've got all the demon blood. You're one of them. And now you've got Crowley's essence, mate. So only his part of you will feel the pain. You'll be free to work your way up the ranks in no time. And then he gets a little closer to loser John, and he sincerely says, There's something else, John. I gave you Kit. Something to hold on to when it gets a bit rough. You love her. I don't. She's yours. You'll have nothing to lose. No way to be hurt. The trap's been sprung. And then he points at Boar and says, and he fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. And at this, Borg is very scared, and he puts up his hands like he's surrendering, and he says, I want no part of this, Constantine. Please, forgive me. The child is yours. And at that, all of a sudden, Bor's spirit leaves Cider, who's just sitting on the ground in the middle of the pentagram. And as he wakes up out of his stupor and becomes aware of what's going on, he begins to say, where's my dad? And Confident John goes over to him and picks him up and says, it's okay, matey. Uncle Conjob's here. And as that's happening, Loser John picks up the dagger that was on the ground, and it seems like he's been convinced by Confident John, and he's on board with the plan now. So he holds the dagger up to his chest, and he yells at Boar saying, fuck you, bastard. That's not enough. Let them go. All of them. And Borg is very serious, and he says, you dare threaten me, you worthless little vandal. I have upheld my end of the bargain. But Loser John digs the dagger into his chest and says, I never bargained with you, tosser. Let him go. I'll fucking do it, I swear. Because now the tables have turned and Boar does not want this crappy version of John's soul, because the second he dies, then the First of the Fallen will get the crappy version of John's soul, and he will be very angry at Boar. So Boar begins to plead with Loser John, saying, wait, I beg of you, please, stay your hand. I will do as you say, please. And then Confident John begins to watch as all the spirits of the children that Boar has taken over eons begin to be released, and we can see that they're smiling and they're very happy to be going up to heaven, I'm assuming. And Confident John's narration says, I hold tightly to little Cider, and together we watch as the light comes to reclaim its own reluctantly. The broken demon surrenders his charges to the place he fears the most. The rushing of children's souls is warm at first, then bursting, like a tidal wave of hot whiskey and honey on a cold, dismal day. Laughing and shrieking, the innocents are shown the lighted pathway home. We're swept up in the clarity of it all. Then finally, only one remains. And the last child's soul is the soul of Astra, and she's looking at Loser John smiling, and she says, I always knew you'd get me, John. I said so. And Loser John replies, oh God, Astra, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then Astra kisses Loser John on the cheek, and she says, don't be. Everything's okay now. And then both Johns and Cider watch as Astra ascends into the heavens. And John's narration says, it's a peculiar experience doing something right for a change. You want to laugh and shout and scream all at the same time. You're focused on more than just the moment. You get this sudden, fleeting urge to reevaluate who you are and to try to do something right with the rest of your life. And then Loser John looks at Boar and says, hey, ever been fucked by a nice Anglo-Saxon boy? And as he says this, he holds the knife back up to his chest. And as Boar yells, Constantine, no! John plunges the dagger into his chest and he says, well, now you have. And with that, the knife hits his heart and he falls to the ground dead. So it seems that the Johns have got their way. All the children's souls are released. Boar's plan is messed up. And now Boar is going to be in very big trouble with the First of the Fallen because this loser version of John's soul has now been released. And as we turn the page, we cut to Greece and we see the moment that John dies. And we see the First of the Fallen smiling and he says, now. And then the soul of Loser John appears in front of him. And Loser John's soul says, I'm yours, First of the Fallen. And the First looks at him with a smile and says, yes, you are. I can't tell you how. And then he pauses because he realizes something's wrong. And he says, wait, you're not. Who the hell are you? And then a big energy blast comes out of his body as he yells, Constantine! And everybody else that was on that rock also burns up because we see there's just little smoke piles where the police were. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Confident John, and he's yelling to Cider saying, go on, matey, run, and stay inside the circles. So Cider runs back out of the woods and towards where his dad was waiting. And at that moment, the First of the Fallen shows up with the limp soul of Loser John. And he looks at Confident John and says, What manner of sick joke is this, you fucking little sperm? What in the name of buggery did you do? And a very smug John lights a cigarette and says, well, that's simple, really, mate. I gave you what you wanted. Or at least he did. And as he says this, he points back to Boar, who's terrified, and he's looking at the First of the Fallen with his hands up saying, No, I had no part in it, my beloved. Constantine tricked me. I wished only to bring you back. Please, I gave up the children for you. And the First is very angry at hearing this, and he says, You did what? And then he raises his hands and he begins to conjure something, and he continues yelling at Boar, saying, You stupid, stupid little prick. You let him win. You blinded yourself with arrogance, as I told you never to do. His debt's been paid with a lump of shit, and that's all because of you. And then we see he has conjured up a gate to hell, and he calms down a little bit and he says, Well, I'm going to have my turn anyway, Boar. To the devil his due, as it must be. I'm going to piss on the soul of the one most hated, and grind his teeth on a diamond stone. But if I am to be allowed only a useless portion of him, you will have to make up the difference. And then some demon hands come out of the portal and grab Loser John's soul along with Boar, and they pull them in. And as confident John watches this, he says, No pleasing some people. And then he looks at the First of the Fallen and he says, So, where'd you go then? Anywhere nice? And the First of the Fallen calmly replies, Oh, Greece, if you must know. And then John begins to laugh, saying, Ha! Testicles, son of Hercules. I bet you felt like a right prat. And not amused, the First of the Fallen says, Constantine, look at me for a moment. I'm deadly serious. While I was away, I had time to think and to observe. He turned me into a mortal, John, but I think he made a huge mistake. I know what it's like now, to feel so impotent, so insignificant, to aspire to nothing more than a nice, quiet life. It's so sad and unfair. I can offer you so much more. I can give you anything. But John's not buying it. In fact, he has to put his hand over his mouth to stop him from laughing, and he says, Nice one, fucking classic. My turn then, right? Stop me if you've heard this one before. Get thee away from me, Satan. And the First of the Fallen is not amused by this, and he says, Did you just say what I thought you said, Constantine? And John just looks at him very smugly and says, Hadn't you better be getting off home? Your dinner's getting cold. And the First of the Fallen very angrily says, Oh, Constantine, you naughty, naughty little boy. I offer you the world, and you have the balls to laugh at me, so certain that you can hide behind desperate bravado inside your little circle, when all you have succeeded in doing is finally crossing the line. And as he says this, he steps into the circle that John thought he was protected by, and he grabs John by the collar of his trench coat and he says, I can't have your soul, Constantine, as much as it pains me to admit, but I will have some small revenge. Oh, and I have so wanted to do this for such a long time. And then he flips John the finger and he says, Up yours, John Constantine. And then he turns around and walks away. So he got a little bit of revenge because John gave him the finger at the very beginning of the Garth Ennis run when he first tricked the First of the Fallen into curing his cancer. Then we turn the page and we cut to a house, and inside we see Rich and his family, and they're seemingly okay now. Obviously, Michelle and Rich are very happy to have their child back and not possessed. And over these panels, John's narration says, Sometimes I'll swear Rich knows just about everything and everyone. That's why I'm hardly surprised when he mentions his Uncle Eddie lives right down the corner. It's all quiet on the Western Front. 2 or 3 hours now since I washed my soul clean and laughed in the devil's face. Nobody knows what I've done, not even the kid. But I know, and that's delightful reason enough to get totally rad-arsed. I look down at Cider and Michelle, taking comfort in each other's relief, and I think about Astra. Everything's okay now, she said. And you know what? I have a funny feeling she's right. Then we get a panel of a very drunk John Constantine singing to himself in the mirror, and then behind him someone says, Hello, John. And as John begins to turn around, We see a woman who's behind the shower curtain, kind of hiding in the shadows, and she says, "Don't turn around. They'll see me." And then John's narration, in reference to what it had just said about thinking everything was going to be all right, says, "Which goes to show you just how bloody wrong I can be sometimes." So John does listen to her and doesn't turn around, but he is able to see who it is, and he says, "Ellie? Christ, what are you doing here, love?" And Ellie replies, "Why, John? Why did you do it?" And John, who's looking at her now through the mirror, says, "Me? What did I do?" And Ellie answers, "You betrayed me, you son of a bitch. I stuck a knife in the devil's back for you, and you stuck a knife in mine. He's going stark raving mad down there, John, turning the whole damn place upside down, trying to find out who sent him away. So tell me, if you can lie quickly enough, why?" And then John very soberingly looks at her in the mirror and says, "'Cause you made yourself a choice, Ellie. The children didn't. I'm sorry." And then Ellie shrinks back into the shadows, and she begins to pull the shower curtain closed, and she says, "You always are, John, and it's always far too late." And with that, Ellie leaves, and John is left staring at the closed shower curtain behind him, and his narration says, "Should have seen it coming, I know. But I was arrogant, totally sure I was doing the right thing. And while I was so busy congratulating myself, the friend who once saved my skin was being thrown to the wolves. So now what? What about the new, uncluttered John Constantine?" And then John looks away from the mirror down into the sink, almost like he's ashamed of himself, and the narration continues saying, "I've given myself a chance at a better life, a fresh start with no complications and no unnecessary baggage. 2 hours in, and already I've started to bugger it up." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue and the conclusion to the Critical Mass story arc. And boy, I thought that one was great. I was a little apprehensive at first because, it's a new writer. And also, they brought back the First of the Fallen right away. And I thought maybe that might have been a bad call. But I really enjoyed this story, especially at the end. Those last couple issues had me on the edge of my seat trying to figure out what John was planning. So I hope you guys had a good time too. And hopefully Paul Jenkins' run continues being this strong. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.